Here in Peace River and Peace Country. When I was last in Canada, I think speaking, where was I? I can't remember. Anyway, yeah, I was in Alberta, in Calgary and stuff, and they told me that they want to build 2 nuclear power plants at Peace River, and I just couldn't believe it. I mean, what a beautiful name for a place. What a lovely place you live in. And I drove in and I said, this is extraordinary country. I've never seen anything like this before. And yeah, you live in a beautiful place, and we drove through hundreds of acres of farmland. So I want to speak to you about, from that perspective. I also want to point out, as you probably all know, you live in a major earthquake zone here. Is that correct? Do you all know that? Yeah, well, if you don't, you need to. It's not a good idea to build 2 or 4 nuclear power plants on an earthquake zone. Actually, Indonesia wants to do that, build a reactor on an earthquake zone near to active volcanoes. What I just want to talk to you about the medical effects mostly. I will talk a little bit about global warming, which is a very, very serious problem. And the way we're going now, the temperatures could rise 4 degrees centigrade by the end of the century, according to a recent publication by a British group in London. The oceans, if the Greenland ice cap melts, and it is in the process of melting, and the Antarctic ice melts, the oceans could rise up to 15 metres by the end of the century. But it's predicted maybe 1 metre, 2 metre, nobody knows. And this book, which is actually for sale back there, that's just come out, called If You Love This Planet, that I wrote in '92, talks about global warming, and 1/3 of the human population lives at sea level, and as the seas rise they'll be drowned or turned into ecological refugees. Epidemics of disease like malaria and dengue and encephalitis will go further north and further south because the earth will be warming. In Australia we live in a tremendous drought area. Bushfires are occurring that leap 6 kilometres and a house suddenly explodes with fire because the air is dry and the forest is tinder dry. So it's really scary. And one day in Australia we had a day of 42 degrees, and I actually didn't know if I was going to make it. You're more sensitive to heat when you're old. The other thing to note is that with global warming, many reactors are built around the oceans at sea level, and as the seas rise, no one's really addressed this yet in the nuclear industry, the control rooms will be flooded and the reactors could well melt down. Whereas in France 2 years ago, when it was very, very hot, the rivers where the French get their water for some of their reactors fell very low, and they were so hot that the water could not be used for cooling, and they had to shut them down. A normal reactor uses about 1 million gallons of water a minute. So it's tremendously water consuming. Of course it goes back into the river, but it's heated up too, so that adds to global warming as well. But I really want to talk to you about the medical dangers, because that's what I am. I'm a paediatrician. My specialty is the most common fatal genetic disease of childhood, cystic fibrosis. 1 in 25 Caucasians carry the gene, so in this audience there would be many carriers. You don't know you've got it till you meet with someone with the same gene, and then you have a baby with cystic fibrosis. It's like blue eyes. You can't have blue eyes unless you have 2 blue-eyed genes because they're recessive or weak. The brown-eyed gene is dominant, so you can have brown eyes with 1 brown-eyed gene and 1 blue-eyed gene, or brown eyes with 2 brown-eyed genes. So here's a quiz. There was a mother and a father who both had blue eyes, and they had a brown-eyed baby, and the one who gets this right gets a present at the end of my talk. Where did the brown-eyed gene come from? Yeah, milkman. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, you've got it. Okay. Now, I want to talk first of all, this book, which isn't here tonight, unfortunately, I wrote 2 years ago, Nuclear Power is Not the Answer to Global Warming, covers what I'm talking about tonight. I can only briefly précis it, but I really encourage you to get it because you'll learn a lot more about the medical problems. Nuclear power does produce, as was pointed out, global warming gases. The mining of uranium is very intensely fueled by fossil fuel, and we've got a lot of uranium in Australia, more than you, and the government wants to dig it out as fast as possible. There are 440 reactors in the world today, and they're all wearing out. They're getting old. And they'll either need to be replaced in the next 10 or 20 years or closed down, but they won't be able to work anymore. And so when we talk about a new nuclear build, it's a little bit farcical, because a nuclear power plant one plant takes 10 to 15 years to build, and Wall Street is costing them now $12 to $15 billion apiece. Wall Street and Standard & Poor's are advising people not to build nuclear power. It's just out of the question. However, nuclear power is a prodigal son of the weapons industry, and the men who designed the bombs, most of whom I knew, felt so guilt-ridden about killing 200,000 people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they thought they could harness atoms for peace. So they started nuclear power, too cheap to meter, sunshine units they called it. But they knew in their heart of hearts how dangerous it was, because they'd been dealing with radiation during the Manhattan Project. So nuclear power at the moment, mining, crushing the uranium and then enriching it. You don't use enriched uranium in Canada in your CANDU reactors, but in America they do. They use two 1,500 megawatt coal-fired plants to provide the electricity to enrich the uranium. A lot of CO2. They also, 91% of the CFC gas that escapes in America comes from that uranium enrichment plant in Paducah, Kentucky, from leaking old pipes. You all know about the Montreal Protocol, which was signed in your lovely country, because CFC damages the ozone layer. But it's, however, 10,000 to 20,000 times more potent as a global warmer than CO2, and 91% of the CFC released in America comes from this uranium enrichment plant, because the uranium industry was, quotes, grandfathered out of the Montreal Protocol. They don't have to abide by it. That's a potent global warming gas. And then to build a reactor, making concrete and cement is very profoundly CO2 intensive. So to build a reactor, it's more CO2. Reactors can only last for 30 to 40 years, because by that time there's been so much neutron radiation on the pipes that they've become embrittled and they break. It was referred to earlier that these plants are being refurbished to increase their life, but it's dangerous to do that, and they actually should be shut down. They replace some of the pipes, but a lot of them are cracking, the steam generators are cracking, and they're also increasing the power of the reactors, because you make more money by making more electricity. The cost of nuclear power really is in the front part: mining, milling, enriching, building the reactor. And then, of course, there's nuclear waste, which I'll get to in a minute. So I've just lost my train of thought. 30 to 40 years. Okay, so you increase the power by increasing the enrichment of uranium from 3% to 4.5%. And some of the reactors are literally shaking themselves with the increased power, and the pipes are breaking. I talked to a very good nuclear engineer the other day from America, who used to totally support nuclear power, and now he's very much opposed, partly because he was an expert witness at 3 Mile Island. And I said to him, what do you think the chances are of a meltdown in the next 10 years in America? And without hesitation, he said 1 in 10. I'll get to a meltdown in a minute, and that would involve you, possibly, if you have reactors built near you. But let's go through the biological effects of radiation. How does there are basically 4 sorts of radiation. There are X-rays, and I'm sure everyone in this room has been irradiated by us, the doctors. Hands up those who've never had an X-ray. Right. What you need to know about radiation is it's cumulative. Each dose you receive adds to your risk of getting cancer. There is no safe dose. And that's a recent study by the National Academy of Sciences in America. Don't ever let the dentist X-ray your teeth once a year. It's totally unnecessary. If you have a sore tooth, you need an X-ray. Always ask your doctor